Andre Chung's critique, and just, there was nowhere else in the world I wanted to be. It was in, out, in, out. This guy has so much experience and I was learning so much. Andre had 20 years in the newspaper business between the Chicago Sun-Times and the Baltimore Sun. He's also a portrait photographer, but a tremendous photojournalist as well. Andre is going to moderate this panel, which is taking that personal project from idea to reality. And we have three panelists who are going to talk about the work that they've been doing, some of it's ongoing. The first is Jett Walls, who's a friend of mine, and also on the board of directors for Focus on the Story. Katie, woo, Katie. Let me tell you why you should clap for Katie, and we'll do it again. So Katie is a documentary photographer, first and foremost. 12 years, something like that, documenting families. She's also dabbling in commercial photography. She is the founder and editor of Confluence Magazine. If you don't follow Confluence now, issue 3 just came out, and she's doing tremendous work helping create a platform for other documentary photographers to share their projects. And she's a great editor, and Confluence is a media partner. We're doing a local storytelling grant program here, and Confluence is going to provide an outlet for that work as well. So that's Jett Walls. Let's hear it for Katie. Next up, we have Jason Hamaker.
AKA Life is a Highway.
Life is a Highway. He's a badass drummer, but he is known mostly for 16,000 images he made in Aleppo before the Syrian civil war. Which have obviously taken on a new life. He's in talks with the Library of Congress for a home for those images, and he's the owner of the Lost Origins Gallery in Mount Pleasant. So if you haven't been over there, definitely do that. Throw some parties there as well. And did I mention he was a badass drummer? So let's hear it for Jason. And finally, last but not least, we have Kirsten Lewis, a fellow Colorado native, coming here from Denver. Kirsten is a documentary photographer, educator, speaker, and mother. And she's pretty freaking good at Instagram too. Her stories, I'm like, this is setting a new bar for how you do social media. So without further ado, welcome our panel.
Check. I want to write it all night long.
Mike, thanks for this.
Born to be wild.
Mike, thanks for the great introductions, man. Appreciate it. So, how's everybody doing? Are we caffeinated yet? Yeah, this one's dead. Can I just project? Oh, this is better.
Much better.
How's everybody doing? Otherwise, I'm gonna have to rap. Got a wrap. So, taking that personal project from idea to reality. Personal projects. We've got a good crew here, and I think without me taking up too much space, we'll jump into the presentations. And then for the last 15 minutes or so, we'll take some questions. So you guys get your questions ready to put to our panel. All right? So we're gonna start with Katie, who has an interesting project that's twisted and turned a little bit. Do you wanna set this up for us, Katie?
You're doing great. I'll give you a quick introduction without giving away too much of the story, because there's a video that you'll get to see. But last year, I started mentoring with this person right next to me in her year-long mentoring class. And my main motivation for signing up for that class... You like your voice? Turn it up loud. My main motivation for signing up for that class was that it was going to be structured around shooting a year-long personal project. And that was something I really wanted to try and to learn how to do. So after a lot of thought about what kind of project would work, my husband has a very good friend of 20 years or so, and he and his partner live in Queens, New York. And there was a lot going on in their lives, and they were very special to us, and I wanted a chance to photograph their love story. So with Kirsten's help and the incredible support of my husband letting me go to Queens over and over and over again, I began photographing this story. It's an ongoing project, and I'm going to let the story tell itself.
Life is a highway.
Of course. It's all up.
Just don't use that one. Just don't use that one.
Can y'all hear me?
Not anymore.
Oh, not anymore.
Not anymore? My mic.
I'm scared. Okay. All right, Katie, nice stuff. Where's the speaker? It's like, you know, we can play the feedback, right? So Katie, this was a complicated story going into it, right? There's a lot of issues, there's things that people are facing, but you knew it was gonna be tough. I mean, it's like crazy logistics, it's not in town. Why in the hell did you think that this was gonna be something that you could pull off?
I had a very encouraging mentor, but also I didn't realize all of the layers that were going to be uncovered when I began working with them. I knew about Matt's condition. He's struggled with bipolar for years, and I knew that Kim had some health issues, and I knew they were having some trouble with their landlord. I wanted to tell their love story, which is that Kim works very hard to create a life that works for Matt. When Matt is well, he's very well. Once I started photographing and being in their space and listening, they started sharing more of what was going on, which is when I learned they were actually being evicted, that Kim's health issues were untreated HIV, that he had only recently started taking medications for, and that the process of eviction was really affecting Matt's mental health, that the anxiety they were facing over that was causing his symptoms to increase, and his cycle, I don't know how much you know about bipolar, but it's kind of waves of good and bad, and those waves can happen at different intervals, and most people have a somewhat predictable schedule. The stress of the eviction was changing Matt's patterns, so Kim was trying to manage that as well. So all of this information came just like one visit after another, like, oh, by the way, this other thing. So it did feel like it got really complicated really quickly.
How long did you work on it? Have you been working on it? Is it still ongoing?
Yes, since March of 2018.
Okay, so a little while. You know, it didn't quite keep moving in the trajectory you thought it was gonna go in. I mean, did you start this originally as a narrative, and where are you going? What are your thoughts with the structure of it now?
With the structure of it now, so yes, I thought it would be a narrative. I thought I would spend some time with them, I would create some photos that showed the ways in which they care for one another, and it would be a really nice, tidy story about two people caring for each other in a tough city, in a tough situation. When Matt left in the beginning of July, I had a lot of conversations with Kirsten and with everyone who would talk to me about it. It's like, what do I do? The story is gone. There's no love story anymore. And everyone said, just, I don't know, but keep shooting. So Kim wanted me to keep shooting, and so I kept going. I don't know where the narrative is now. I just know I feel really invested in their lives. I'm very interested to see what will happen, and the only thing I know to do is to keep going up and photographing as there's more to tell.
Yeah, you've got a lot of really intimate moments in there. Nice details with their hands. I see you focus on that, and the space between them, whether it's close or far. And you've got a lot of compassion and empathy in your photos. Is that something that you consider for the project, or is that just built into the way you work?
I think it's built into the way I work, but it's also a reflection of the access that I had with them already. They are friends of our family. They're important to us. Although I'd never stayed in their house before. We'd always just visited New York and hung out for a few hours, or they'd come to DC and hang out. So it was quite different to be in their space as not quite a visitor, just as a person who was sort of quiet in the corner, or someone there to listen. I've found that people really want to talk if there's someone who will sit there quietly. And that, I think, increased the intimacy, being there. And I think when people live with mental illness, there aren't a lot of opportunities to talk about the private things. Nobody wants to be a burden to someone else. So I discovered if I would sit there and listen quietly, I would hear hours worth of things that had been in Kim's head that no one else had ever really listened to. And he couldn't talk about with Matt because Matt was the person he was caring for. So I think the intimacy just came out of being in their space and quiet.
So while you're working, you're doing maybe a lot more sitting around and just being in their space than actually shooting.
For sure. The first couple of visits, I did a lot of shooting. And after that, I did way less shooting and way more listening and watching, and the photos became more meaningful.
Okay, so a little bit of secret sauce. You know, you mentioned that Kirsten was your mentor going into this. How do you think having some guidance and having an editor help you steer this thing and keep you on track? Can you comment on the value of that?
I think it's the most important thing in creating a personal project. And I'm just gonna guess, like at any level, I'm guessing when you're a professional photojournalist, you're working with editors who are giving you feedback and helping you make some of those choices. And ultimately, they're gonna decide what work goes into a publication anyway. But when you're learning, you always need different eyes. I think you're very personally invested in the story you're telling. And if you're not a professional, you don't always know what photos work and which ones don't. So having a mentor who can troubleshoot with you, who can look at the photos and let you know, like, well, everything you're taking is from 3 feet away. Have you ever considered stepping back or stepping forward? Just like the little technical things. But then also to say, like, I feel like you've explained this part of the story, you've explained this aspect of character, where else can you go? What is missing from the story? What do you need to shoot next time you're there? All of those things are really essential. And I don't think you can be the creator of the photos and have the big picture mindset at the same time. I think you need someone helping bring it all together.
Kirsten, you have anything to add to that?
No, other than I was like really invested in the story. It was a little bit like every time she'd come back, I was excited to hear what was happening. Katie works super hard and is so emotionally invested in their life that I knew that she would and is going to continue to tell the story with integrity, honesty, and with respect for them in their lives. Yeah.
What kind of things were you pointing out to her and helping with to keep her on track, do you recall?
I think the biggest one was when Matt left. That was like big, because she was panicking. She's like, my story's over. I was like, I plan on doing this for a year. And I was like, your story's not over. Your story is just beginning. It's just taken a different direction. And I impress that upon that class and all the classes going into a personal project, that go into it with curiosity and having questions that you want to answer, but be open to the idea that where it ends up might not be anywhere where you thought it was going to start. To just be open to those changes.
So, what do you do with it now? Do you just put it in Confluence and keep it moving, or what are you thinking?
This one isn't ready to go into Confluence, I don't think. Right now, Matt has drifted out of the picture again, and Kim is waiting for an apartment. He's on some waiting lists. I can't stay with him in the apartment where he's staying right now, which in the visits I've had have affected my ability to make more intimate photos. Like, we can't even have a conversation, we have to meet out in public. His roommate that he's staying with is not amenable in any way, shape, or form. So I think, I feel like the next stage of the project is to wait and see what happens. Kim is in a holding pattern, so when something changes, and I have the photos of that. So when something changes, I will go back and make photos of the changes.
So you don't feel like it's complete yet in any way?
I feel like I guess I could stop. That could be the story that we just saw, but I'm really interested in what happens. And I think Matt will always drift in and out of Kim's life. I think they're connected in a way that's not gonna change, short of one of them passing on. And I'm interested to see what that will look like for them.
We're gonna be getting into, I guess, a little bit more, I think, about like how you know when to stop, when a project is complete.
I'm still working on that.
Yeah. And quick sidebar on Confluence, is that magazine that you pulled together, is that a good home for projects like this?
I want to say yes. I mean, my goal with Confluence is that there are many of us, I think, coming either from other genres of photography or drifting from enthusiastic hobbyist into taking work a little more seriously. And there's not always a place for that work that gets created. We're building a portfolio, probably hope to get in front of a photo editor at some point, but you're creating work that means something to you. And I think it's really sad to think there would never be a home for that work. I also hope that perhaps by aggregating it, photo editors might be interested. Like, oh, here's a place where I can see work created by several people. And if it's good, I could call them up. There's also, I have a submission coming up from a working photojournalist, and her project is something that she worked on for 10 or 15 years before she started getting assignments. It's a project that helped her get assignments, but her assignments are getting published. This project that she invested 10 years in just sits in her portfolio, and now it's gonna get published. She really cares about it, but no one's ever gonna pick it up. But Confluence can pick it up. So I'm excited, like something that she's worked on can have a home.
Cool, cool. So next, we're gonna move on to Jason, who has like a gazillion photos from Syria pre-war.
Can we see them all?
We'll show you enough. Jason, you want to tell us a little bit about your project before we jump into it?
Sure. Whoa.
And song, please.
14 years ago next week, I was in a band that broke up the eve before a 3-week US tour, and I was really frustrated with the band dynamic, meaning its relationship. You have to count on everyone. I did not want to become a DJ, which is what most band people do when they want to do something by themselves. And so I kind of came up with the idea with a group of friends of let's form a rock orchestra and compose symphonic movements of music with like everyone we possibly know in hopes of playing the Kennedy Center as opposed to the 930 Club or the Black Cat or wherever we would normally play. And the idea was, let's get a piece of old a cappella music of some sort and score to this music. So I was driving through Rock Creek Park. Is everyone, who's from DC? Rock Creek Park, ladies and gentlemen. Again, life is a highway. Yeah, exactly. So I was driving through Rock Creek Park and my friend called and was like, hey, I found these amazing chants from Serbia. And I completely misunderstood him and thought he said Syria. And this is how history was made. And I was like, dude, I was so close to the border of Syria. He's like, I said Serbia. I was like, I know, I was so close. And then I went through the tunnel by the zoo and my phone cut off and it sparked this memory of a book where I had read about this guy that finds this ancient chanting in the deserts of Syria. And I called him on the other side of the tunnel and I was like, yo, remember that book with the guy in the desert? And he was like, I said Serbia. And I was like, well, whatever. I was like, you said Serbia. I was like, but remember the book we read? And my roommate David, who's speaking tomorrow, and we all lived together at this moment, it was this extreme misunderstanding, and I'm hyper ADD and really enthusiastic when I choose to be. And so I was like, dude, you go find some Serbian chant, I will research the Syrian chant, and I'll get back to you by the end of the week. And I ended up finding an email address that goes to the author. This guy's name is William Dalrymple. The book was called From the Holy Mountain. It was New York Times top 50 book. And I found an email address that I assumed would go to his publisher or his publicist. And I lied and wrote potential speaking engagement in Washington, D.C. with the idea of that he would be speaking to me on the telephone. So I wasn't officially lying, but that's my scam. And I was like, I was in these bands, and I read all your books, and I would love to get this chant. And he emailed me 4 hours later. He's like, it's not a chant in the desert. It's this church in the world's oldest city. This is a great idea. If you go to Syria, this is what you tell a taxi driver at the airport. It's like, I'm not going to Syria to start a rock symphony. Like, it's just not gonna happen. But it was a Syrian Orthodox church, which is, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Bible, they help vote in the New Testament. And it's the ancient, it's the foundation of that component of history. And years prior, I was on a photo trip where I flew into deep eastern Turkey and drove 4,000 miles and just photographed everything that I found interesting, and was at, one of their monasteries was built in 320. And I was like, dude, I bet you the guys at that monastery have a CD that I could get of this stuff. And so I then got online and tried to find, this is not the monastery, tried to find this monastery, and to abridge everything, I find an email address, info@SyrianOrthodoxChurch.org. And there's no website for SyrianOrthodoxChurch.org, it's just an email address. And I was like, I talked to this author, and I've been to these places, and I'd love to get a CD. And the Archbishop of the United States emailed me 2 days later and was like, this is fascinating, please call me. Whoa, okay. How do you talk to an archbishop on the telephone? And then we ended up talking, and he was like, I don't have the music that you're looking for. I've got something similar, but not what you're looking for. I was like, well, I will pay whatever it costs to have it imported in the United States. And he's like, no, we don't have a recording. I was like, you mean we with a capital W? Humanity? And he's like, no. I was like, would you like me to make one for you? And that's when the rock orchestra went out the window, and it turned into this huge cultural preservation project I've worked on for the past 14 years. I'm an associate record producer with Smithsonian Folkways. That recording comes out next fall, 15 years later. I've recorded and produced numerous ancient religious minority recordings in Syria and have put them out after the war. And part of this, of what the handful of photos that I'm going to show, I went to Syria, to Aleppo specifically, between 2006 and 10. I was an official guest of the church. I worked for a museum in New York. I was their straight up Indiana Jones, their explorer and photographer, and we'd read ancient manuscripts and have to go find them. And it was a life-changing experience. And then the war happened, and I just shut down. It's like, what do you do when everything that, something that's changed your life is no one even knew what Syria was when I was going. And then now it's on the news. And so for years, I just didn't do anything. And then numerous friends were like, dude, you have this huge archive of stuff. You cannot just sit back. I was like, dude, I'm not sitting back. I didn't want to be accused or do anything that took advantage or profiteered off of the destruction of a country or a culture. And so I just stopped. And then I decided to release I recorded a group of Sufis in a 500-year-old house. Just kind of decided to release that, not knowing if anyone would care, to be honest. I did it in conjunction with Record Store Day, and I put it out on LP. It was this huge thing, and it was crazy. It went on the Billboard charts, it sold. I ended up all of a sudden being on all these NPR shows. My first interview ever for this subject was on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. It was nuts. I was in her office for 2.5 hours, going over all this stuff. But it was nuts. But the photo component to this is that group that does the ancient chanting are refugees into Syria in World War I to photograph an ancient civilization inside of a modern ancient city. And I needed to get government permission for this. And the Syrian ambassador here in DC looked at my photos and was like, I really like your style. I would like you to make a book on the city of Aleppo. We don't have one in English. And so in 2007, I was tasked, I was not paid by the government, to make a book. That will probably end up coming out in 2 years. So I have this huge collection of images. It's 20,000. And it's like a lot of it's like a religious ceremony. It's like 500 from this one ceremony. But this collection of images is from an exhibit I debuted last year, and it's night scenes and sunsets from the city. Almost everything here is destroyed that you are seeing. And I wanted to show those because the sun still sets and the sun still rises, and they're all still beautiful, but the skyline's changed and the people have gone, the people are still there, and I just wanted to have something that was far more atmospheric and far more arty, that leaves room for interpretation, as opposed, like everyone wants to know what's destroyed, what does this look like now, and instead of the voyeur aspect of just showing what's gone, I wanted to show what's there, and the sun still sets. And so, like, this is the ancient souk. It's a UNESCO heritage site. It's about 20 miles collectively, and like this is gone. You know, but the images, like this is on a Friday when everything's closed. So when even Syrians come to look at this, I wanted to show people that have never been there, kind of a more beautiful side of it, but also people that used to live there, sides of the city that they don't normally get to see because they're just like living. And so this was like only 16 images out of thousands that I did last year, and that's what I've been working on for the last 14 years.
All right, so you're obviously insane. As you're creating this body of work, and you said this was your last serial project, right? How did you approach all of them? Were you thinking differently about all the projects, or were you just shooting, like just spraying everything and then working it out in the edit? What was your process?
No, like the process was I was not aware of the weight of my host. I was a guest, an official guest, which I didn't understand what that meant either, of the Archbishop of the Syrian Orthodox Church. As an example, I love this story. He was like, come with me, come to my meetings. I cannot speak Arabic. I can't speak another language. I can survive in a taxi and say hotel or chair. Seriously, you know, like, and the first person that walked into the room was this elderly woman whose husband had passed away and she needed money. And I'm shooting everything. About every 90 seconds for years I have photographs. And then this very dignified crew came in, and everyone's speaking in Arabic. And the Archbishop turned to me, he's like, Jason, let me introduce you to the Prince of Greece. I was like, okay. And I was just like, I've never met royalty. How do I?
Did you have on clean underwear?
No, I had on a band shirt. Like I was like grossly unprepared for the entire scenario. But he was like, "Why don't you get up and tell him what you're doing here?" I was like, "Oh Lord!" But like, so it was this extremely polar experience of being out on the town, in the streets. Like I spent lots of time in graveyards, photographing where the Jewish community of Syria is buried, and the Kurds kind of run the stalls. So it's like everything from Greek royalty, whose sister is the Queen of Spain, to grave diggers, and like everything in between. It was, I realized at the time I was being accepted by the entire spectrum of the socioeconomic class of Syria, and then took it really seriously about how do you actually, as an outsider, how do you represent such a diverse and foreign to a Western, like foreign experience in a way that can help understanding of another culture. And that's what that's mentally where I was for a very long time.
So, so this is a good example of how something that just starts as a whim,
Yes.
right? That just grows and balloons into something much bigger than yourself. At what time did you realize, or at what point did you realize kind of the weight of the project that you were, like, were you a year in? Was it right away? Was
No,
it like when you
when
met
I
the
came
Prince?
home-
Like, when did you say, okay,
Yeah.
I have to really kind of buckle down and focus on this so that I can really treat it with the proper respect, and I'm kind of in some deep water now?
The same day that I met the Prince of Greece, this kind of older man walked into the room. He was like he was lost. I was like, what is happening? Someone's grandfather's here. And then the Archbishop turned to me, he was like, this is the last head of the Jewish families in northern Syria, and then turned back. And I had heard there was an amazing synagogue in Aleppo. It was very ancient. And I just asked him, I was like, hey, I heard there's a synagogue here. He's like, would you like to see it? Like, totally. And it turned into this famed, infamous scenario, the Syrian government, where we ended up, I didn't know we broke in, but these guys like broke into the synagogue, and it was wild, but I posted photos, this is off my first trip, of the synagogue, and within a day or two, they were used in international articles about the Jewish history. And then someone found out, I was immediately given a huge photo exhibit on the synagogue. And then the Hebrew that the inscriptions are written in are it's very specific Arabic Hebrew. No one could read them that I could find in DC. I had to go to no one at the Jewish Museum in New York could read them. They sent me to the Sephardi Federation in New York. Their scholar couldn't read it. He's like, you're gonna need to find someone from the Aleppian Jewish community. It's like, there isn't one. He's like, no, there's like 70,000 here in Brooklyn. I was like, what? Really? And then this woman who was just like she was just like an administrator, came in and read everything. She was like, how did you get these? I was like, I just photographed this. It's like, you personally took photos of the synagogue? I was like, yeah, like 5 months ago. She's like, call this phone number. Okay, so I call the phone number, a woman answers. It's like, I have photos of the synagogue in Aleppo and I was told to call you. She's like, who gave you my number? Straight up. And I was like, this woman from the Sephardi Federation? She's like, call this number. And then I called another number, and this guy was like, how did you get my number? I was like, Sheila told me to call you. He's like, why are you calling me? He's like, I have a collection of images from the synagogue in Aleppo. He was like, when can you meet? And I was like, where do you live? I said, who are you? What is this phone conversation? And he's like, I live in New Jersey. He's like, I live in D.C. He's like, I can drive and come find you. And that is when I realized the weight. They did a huge screening of me. This museum had been trying to get a photographer into Syria for years. And I was like, have you asked the government? They're like, no. I was like, would you like me to ask them for you? And they were like, who is this kid? Like, what's going on? And it turned really intense. He was the director of the museum, then the owner of the museum was kind of like Bruce Wayne. He's this extremely wealthy individual. He owns most of Coney Island, and was just like, bring him here. And so I went to New York, and the last photographer they interviewed, they flew him from Germany for a 15-minute meeting. And I was like, this is nerve-wracking. And so I was like, can I take the train? Like, can you guys put me on the Acela? Do I have to drive? And they're like, we will take care of the Acela for you. I was like, thank you, sir, thank you. And took the train up, and I had all my little prints from the synagogue, and the guy's flipping through it, and he goes, you don't have to worry about anything ever again. I was like, what does that mean? I was like, I love that, but yeah, okay, let's do it. And then I became their explorer for years, and that ended with war. And so that whole mysterious adventure into the depths of ancient Jewish history was like, this is real. Like, this is heavy, and this is real, and I will do this. And that project had to get personally approved by President Assad. Like, I went there with the highest levels of, not security, but like of permission. I didn't have papers for it. I just had a phone number. If anyone had a problem, I just give them a phone number and they leave.
Wow.
It was crazy.
So you basically rode this project bareback, no saddle, no
Yeah,
reins,
nothing.
just wherever it went.
But being from the punk rock music world, I think that's why I'm the only person that has done that. It's like,
Right.
it's like, I'm always equated to being a parent. Like, you don't know what you're doing. You kind of know what you're doing. You don't need to sleep, at least I don't. And you're just going out and doing things, and you're there for I'm there for the experience, and I'm there for to meet people, and then, no matter what the language is. And when you're by yourself, people tend to be friendlier to an individual as opposed to a group.
Okay. Kirsten, I'm sorry you have to follow that.
Life is a highway.
So Kirsten, tell us about your project.
So in June of 2015, I had a private commission to photograph a family for 24 hours. And the moment I walked into the house and met the kids, I knew there was something very special with their 5-year-old Carson. Carson had begun wearing dresses when he would come home from kindergarten. That was the only time he was allowed to wear them at that point. And throughout the day, I get very close to my clients. I can get trust and access pretty quickly. We start talking, and I'm told about this story about earlier that year they had taken both their sons to Disney World, and Carson really wanted to go to, you can go to the castle and become a princess for a day. And his dad was really having a hard time with this idea that his son wanted to become a princess, that he wanted to wear dresses, that his favorite color was pink. And Carson just broke down hysterically. Please let me do this. This is the one thing I really, really want. This is all I want from Disney. And so they agreed. So he goes for 3 hours, and they make him up. And he comes out, and Ben told me it's the happiest he's ever seen a human being his entire life. And it was at that moment that he would support anything and everything that Carson wanted at that point in terms of challenging his gender. So he did wear a dress out in public the day that I shot. And I left the shoot and contacted Kelly and Ben after, and I said, I'm not sure where this would go, but I just really want to tell your son's story. And they agreed, and they gave me full access. So I've been photographing Carson for 4 years. At 5, he did identify at that time, he identified with being a gay male at 5. And the reason I can say that is when we were in the car during that day, Ben was talking to the older son, Colton, about, oh, and that's how you get impress the cute girls. That's how you get the cute girls for you. And Carson said, and don't forget the cute boys for me. Now, 4 years later, you'll see that he now identifies as gender fluid, non-binary, and I'm not quite sure where it's going from here. But at this point, I do have full access, and my hope is to follow him into his late teens, early 20s, or even further. Ironically, when I was asked to speak on the panel, I love projects, especially long-form narrative, so I have 3 projects going on right now that are very long-term, this one being one of them. And I had to choose one to talk to you about, and I chose this one, but in the 4 years I've been shooting, I've never looked at a single photo. So I had to go through my 4 years of archives, and then I was like, I don't even know if I have anything in 4 years. But I do, and it was really kind of magical that parents had never seen any photos, I hadn't seen any photos, to finally send Ben and Kelly some photos and say, look how much he's changed. Like, look how much he's grown, and his story is becoming very clear without me having to force it. But through the narrative, I'm really enjoying seeing this progress.
I mean, how do you get your head around a multi-decade project?
I just didn't think it could be told in a day or a week or a year. Like, I think this is I want to see his process. I don't even have my why necessarily yet in terms of, I know my why. I don't know how to define the project yet, other than I'm following his life at this point. And they also know that it's his story. So if he asks me to stop, especially now he's 9, if he asks me to stop, I will. It's up to him what he wants. But he loves me. Like, we really care about one another. And I care so much about this project. I literally flew to Hawaii when his parents had their renewal. They renewed their vows after 20 years. I literally flew for one photo on my dime, just to make sure I could get that one picture. Thankfully I did. I was really nervous. He's gonna see Times Square for the first time this summer. So I'm meeting them there. He's in art and theater and dance now, and I just know he's gonna be famous and on Broadway. So again, there's this pressure, like, I have to make that photo the first time he sees Times Square, the first time he goes to his first Broadway show. That's very important for me in terms of this, because who knows, with a 20-year project, all these photos you're seeing, you may never see again. I have no idea how it will be edited a decade from now. But I do feel like the first time he sees Times Square will probably be like one of those photos that will be in there, is my guess.
So you better nail it.
I have to, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure for me, yeah.
So do you want to talk about the why?
I can talk about the why. So one of the things that really inspired me with this story in particular is because for the last 20 years, I have been convinced that my own father is gay. But he grew up in a small, narrow-minded, closed community, which I'm learning more and more about as I become older. And he's never been given the safe space or place to accept that, I think, within himself or out in the world. And even, I'm very openly bisexual, and he knows that, my father knows that. And I would think if anyone could provide that safe space, it would be me, and he's never come out to me. But there's many reasons for me believing this. He reminds me of Carson. He's in dance and theater and music. He's always been a musician. And the personal connection for me is it's kind of me exploring what would have happened to my dad, where my dad would have ended up had he had the parents that Carson has, had the support, had this safe environment to explore his gender and who his true self is. And many nights I've cried, like in immense pain for my father, because I don't think he has ever been his genuine self because of this. So there is a very personal connection between me and this project.
So you have the personal connection, you're exploring big themes, you know, in the project. It's like exactly the opposite of how Jason approaches this. Can you tell us like how keeping those themes and whatnot in consideration affects how you approach the pictures that you're trying to get, and you know what you're thinking about while you're making it? You talked a little bit about you know, decades later, his first in Times Square, but
Yeah.
you know, let's elaborate on that a little bit, on your approach.
So for me at this point, it's important to highlight these monumental times in his life. This photo that you're seeing here, this was, he got to dance in Disneyland, which is a big deal, it's a big invite. But you notice he's still dancing as a boy. He's dressed as a boy in his group. So those kinds of things are important for me. I'm going where I think it is a pivotal moment in his life, rather than just going and shooting everything. Also, they live in Arizona, I live in Denver, and I'm on the road 250 days a year for work. So I literally have to schedule, I have to have conversations with his parents months to a year in advance. What is coming up that's important? I was just recently with them, his first dance competition. I thought that was important to be there. I am considering how his gender plays a part in the moments in his life that he's experiencing, and I'm also considering how that might change, because right now he is he's fluctuating between dressing as a male and a female right now, and I'm curious, like, where is that gonna go from here? He and his parents and I'm not feeling that he's like trans. He doesn't feel like he's female on the inside, at least he hasn't expressed that now, but he does want to be thought of as a girl. So that also is something I'm exploring. How do I say that visually? And I'm struggling with that a little bit. Like, I want to show how he actually feels, and it's one thing I'm going into every time now that I shoot.
You need a mentor.
I know. I just reached out to Lucienne yesterday, so.
So what's your ultimate presentation, you think, for this? Is it a book? Is it an exhibit? Are you gonna like break it out in pieces as you go over the years? Have you given that any thought?
I have. So one of my mentors right now is David Allen Harvey, and we have talked about this project, and he reminded me that even though I'm working on it for 10 years, I can still show parts of it now. That's something to remember. Like, I don't know, for me, I was like, well, it's not finished, so I'm not gonna show it. But he said there is a place and a space for this in the world to be published as you're working on it. And that was really good advice for me. I'm not that worried about the presentation of it at the very end, but I would guess it would be maybe a book. I'm thinking, with that amount of time dedicated to this, it might be a book. Also, it's his story, so I won't make really any decisions without him, and maybe when the time comes to collaborate with him and see how he wants his story to be told.
So that's a really good point, because like personal projects are by definition personal, right? So do you make any considerations about how much the project is about you and what you're exploring, and how much it is about the people that you're photographing, and you know, where do you kind of split the baby on that? You know, and anyone can jump in, but please, first.
It's funny because I take a lot of ownership over my commercial work, whether it's private commissions from families, or I'm working for companies, or those are my photos, right? Like, I'm showing you how I'm interpreting your life, your products, your message. But when it comes to my personal projects like this, when a subject is giving me their life, they're trusting me to tell it with incredible integrity, that's when I feel like it is their story. And I am very conscientious of being as honest and true to what they want to say and how they feel as possible. So when it comes to projects like this, and I have a couple of others where I've been given this amazing gift to give them a platform, like I'm just the portal to tell their story to the world. I'm there for them. So it is more his story than anything about me in this particular situation.
Okay. I'm looking at the time, and we started a little late, but we're bumping up on it. Yeah, I just want to open it up into questions, unless somebody else had something to add to that, or?
I'll add.
I trust you with my mic.
Yeah, so with my project, I have a very, very tight-knit group of advisors that before I produce anything, or before I publish anything, or before I say anything, that I kind of have a review process with a handful of people that lived in the city, that kind of know the city, and then allow to be like, do you feel that this represents you? And the big question that I struggled with for a long time is that we all do as photographers is, am I interpreting this on my own understanding, or is this what I'm actually finding? And by that, I meant this overwhelming, incredible, multicultural, multi-religious city that I felt was kind of misled in the West. Like, the Christian-Muslim relation in Aleppo was mind-blowing. It was really, really incredible. That was just not talked about. And I spent years meeting with people and talking with people to see if this is an authentic experience, or is this just something I'm hoping exists and I'm editing to produce that result. And more, time and time and again, it was like, no, I had the same experience over and over and over. And so for something on a larger scale like mine, that's my ultimate concern, is misrepresenting something large.
Good stuff. Katie, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was gonna mention that in the course of following Kim and Matt's story, I've bumped up against times when I personally questioned choices that people were making, which I think is pretty typical, right? We all do that, and even people that we love and are close to. So thinking about how to tell their story with respect and integrity, and process things in my own mind, and then what comes out, right? Like, just balancing that, because it is their story. And there have been moments, even as I've been able to present some of this work, where I've used a title and realized if my friends saw this title, I think they would be bothered by what I had just said, and having to rethink, understanding their perspective, Kim's perspective in this, Matt's perspective, and making sure that the way that my brain filters things is not harming them or misunderstanding their story. So I think it's an interesting balance to know where you're coming from and to be really aware of your thought process as you tell another person's story. And then I think it was Reddy Roy yesterday talking about recognizing the psyche of the person that you're photographing, really digging deep empathetically to make sure that the photos that you're making represent what their experience and their thought process would be. So that's something that I'm learning and working on, and shooting this project with Kim and Matt has helped me work through some of those questions.
So the consensus then is get out of the way of your project, right? Keep yourself out of the way. Yeah.
But you also get to know yourself, right? Like, I think it's a little of both, because there's something with Kirsten and Jason that has both intrigued you. There's something with Kim and Matt, and there's some history of mental illness in my own family, and I'm from a family that does not talk about mental illness. I see a therapist now, and some people in my family think that's crazy. So looking at what mental illness looks like in another family is part of my personal exploration, but it's not their story.
Right.
So as an artist, I get to work through those things in my head, and that's what I talk about with my therapist and my mentors. But I have to think about how that's coming out in the story, because it's someone else's story. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Question?
Katie, this is a question for you.
Hi guys. When Matt disappears, have you considered pursuing what happens to him, where he goes?
Yeah, that's what I really wanted to do, but I live in Washington D.C. and I have a family, and I didn't have the capacity in my life right now to follow what was going to happen with Matt. Initially, when he left, he went to live with his parents, who live somewhere in upstate New York, and they don't believe in mental illness either. They think he just has a real temper. And my life wasn't structured so that I could disappear and kind of hunt that down. Life was not a highway for me at that time. And then it was more like a byway. So in some sense, my capacity to follow that aspect of the story was pretty limited, but I could manage to follow Kim's.
Mike's here with the mic, so.
So, hi, my question is for Jason, and I think this is kind of interesting because you had a total different intent. You were gonna make music, you were just trying to find a chant and driving down the road. So, how would you tell other photographers, like, okay, so I think my road is this way only, but your road was way over here, and you had to like listen and let it be. So how do you make sure that you don't miss that, right?
It is really difficult. I always say embrace the gray. So many people live black and white. What do you do? I do this. What do you believe? I believe this. Be open to getting in the river, live in the current. I think about it all the time. It's like, it is a bizarre place to be, where it's like, this whole thing started because I misunderstood someone. It's comedic, but then the other three people that were at that table, they were like, well, you went to Syria, we kept our jobs. I was like, well, I don't really have a real job. I do, but you know what I mean? And that's something actually as well. It's like, being a photographer, or now a photographer, I have set up an infrastructure that allows me to go do this. I don't have a job where I have to tell someone what I'm doing, except my wife, who's my boss at work and my boss at home. But honestly, I had a very, very, very conscious decision about 15 years ago that I enjoy this, I want to do this, and I need to create a way to do this. So instead of doing one job, I decided to do 5. I started submitting articles, I started submitting photographs. I'm still a massage therapist. I took off this morning to come here. I've been a massage therapist for 18 years. And I, have some commercial real estate, just diversify. And that allows me to be able to do things like playing in a band at 43 and going to other sides of the world and everything in between.
Cool. He's coming.
You have 2 mics here, too.
We got 2 mics, okay.
First of all, I want to thank all 3 of you. I mean, it was incredibly fascinating, your stories and how brave you are to tell them. But on the telling part, Kirsten's story, you seem to have clarity around your story. It's a prospective look, analysis going forward. Jason, to me, when I heard what you're doing, to me, yours could be a historical look at what was. It could be certainly a political message of maybe let's not do this again. There could be a cultural story. To me, I'm like, blah, 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 blah. There's so much going on when I'm listening to you, what the message is. And Katie, to me, yours also has less clarity around what is the message that you want to tell. So, okay, I know that yours is a prospective and retrospective, and you go on and on for years. At what point, though, as you're studying a subject, do you start to clear? I've written a number of books, and I've at some point had to come up with the thesis around the story that I wanted to tell and move it forward. I'm not hearing that, and that's the confusion for me. Is as you start to do a photo storytelling, there has to be a point at some point where you're saying, okay, this is the message, and this is how my 20,000 photos, or this is how my what 10 years of investigation, are moving towards fomenting that thesis, and I don't understand how you do that.
Briefly before you answer, I think that for a lot of us, it's doing the work just for the work's sake. You know, we got to get out there. We've got things we've got to explore. We've got, you know, personal issues that we want to examine. We've got commentary, right? And then whatever happens, happens from there. Jason, good point. Katie, good point, right? And I don't think it always has to be, you know, the way Kirsten's doing it. It's laid out A to B all the way to Z. You know, so I'll just leave that, but please.
So I grabbed the mic from Jason because I want to tell you you're in very good company. You basically summarized my last portfolio review with James Estrin. He said, this could have been a story, but things have really gone pear-shaped. Yes, they have. But so Andre, you also got to where I was going. So this was a learning process for me. This is the first long-term project that I have photographed. So a lot of it, I mean, there was an aspect of exploring my own experience, understanding mental illness. There was a story of people that I really cared about that I felt like is worth seeing and understanding. And then there was the process of learning, like just jumping in and making the work. I saw something that interested me and intrigued me, and I followed it. And I've learned a ton of things, one of which is sometimes your story just like peters out or goes away. But something that I learned from Kirsten, in many of her classes, she talks about a story by Darcy Padilla about Julie, who was a woman she initially met, correct me if I get anything wrong here, she initially met her in a drug treatment facility.
No, she was photographing the apartment. She was photographing
The apartment that people were being evicted from.
She was one of the women in there. Yeah.
Julie was one of the women in there. She really connected with her and began to follow her life for 22 years.
Amazing story. You guys should look it up. Darcy Padilla.
It's beautiful, and Kirsten has referenced that many times, and it came up when my love story collapsed. Like, well, you know, Darcy Padilla photographed Julie for 20 years, and when Julie passed away, she's continuing to photograph with her children. So the idea that something can go on, like, I'm open to that, but it might not ever be something that has a story and gets out into the world. It may just be my practice.
The only thing I wanted to add is, so I'm finishing up my first long-term project, it's been 8 years in the making, called Unsupervised, and it's a book. I had no idea what the message was until I started editing it and like narrowing it down and looking at the pictures as a body of work and how they worked together. So that helped, the editing process really helped me kind of refine or define what I wanted to say, especially for Unsupervised. And I think that we talked about that with you, like, once you start getting this body of work and we start looking at the photos, okay, this is where I think these are working together. This is creating a narrative. This has story arc. So I think it's okay to start shooting and collecting pictures and taking some time to just get to know your subject, and you don't have to have that finite definition right away. It can come in the editing process.
Okay. We have to cut it. One more?
Make it fast.
I just have a really quick question. As women, I feel like, Kirsten, you're in a position right now with Birdie being so young, you're able to travel. But as you get older, how do us as women tackle projects that aren't close to us? Because we, as much as we want it to be different, we are typically the caretakers in our families. So how do we get ourselves out there as women telling stories versus the men who can just say, hey babe, I'm going out to Syria for the next 3 months. I'll see you when I get back, you know? And don't forget the honey-do.
That is a gross misunderstanding of how it happens. I am the stay-at-home father. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old that know what Syria is. Because I've created this infrastructure of creativity.
So Birdie doesn't come with me anymore, or she comes like half the time now when I travel. I think having an open conversation with your partner is number one, to explain how important this is. Number two, I take work that I don't want to fucking do, so that I can financially provide either childcare when I need it. My husband's also a stay-at-home dad. I'll connect you guys, and also I put it on the schedule now, as if it's work. So I know now this is important to me. I have to create, I have to tell these stories. And the third piece of advice is you don't have to go to Aleppo. You don't have to go to Arizona or Hawaii. I have 2 other long-term projects that are right in Denver. So I can go shoot for an afternoon or the day or the weekend. That's the biggest thing I learned from David Ellen Harvey, is your best stories are literally in your backyard. So keep that in mind as well.
I'm just gonna say, if you take yourself seriously, your spouse will take you seriously. And that does mean putting it on the schedule, treating it as work, explaining to them what it means to you. Dads can watch children. Sometimes it's going to look different than what we would do, and we have to be okay with it. I don't have any idea what's going on at my house right now, but they're fine. I'm leaving for 3 weeks next month, and it'll be the longest trip I've taken away from them. But I did all these little trips to Queens where they practice, they have their life. They can do it, walk away, and do something for yourself.
Yes.
Just want to say thanks to everyone for participating and showing your work and sharing all that you shared.
Let's hear it again for Andre Chung moderating that panel. And Katie, Kirsten, and Jason for their amazing work. Let's hear it. We're going to take a 15-minute break, maybe 12-minute break, and come back for Patrick Brown at 11 o'clock.